Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
The book of Daniel is the premier study of prophecy in the Old Testament, comparable to the book of Revelation in the New. On today's program, Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me chapter 5 of Daniel and the story of Belshazzar.
And JR, this gets very interesting. Again, Daniel is a prophecy of the times of the Gentiles. And we are now, I guess, on the in the inner circles of a Gentile kingdom. It's about 538 BC as we enter the scene given in chapter 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. In other words, he toasted everybody with a sloshing goblet of wine. It was quite a picture. If you can imagine a banquet hall with circulating waiters and with the tables piled high with all kinds of goodies, fruits and meats and everything, and people, of course, taking a little too much wine. And this is a scene of, shall we say, of biblical proportions. And it's 538 BC as we departed from the preceding chapter, chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar was paying homage to the Most High God.
Yes.
And suddenly, wow, it's 538 BC. We've gone through a succession of rulers. Nebuchadnezzar had died. He was replaced by evil Merodach, who was in turn replaced by a man called Neriglissar, who was replaced by Laboro-Soar-Chad. And then Laboro-Soar-Chad was replaced by Nabonidus in 555 BC, who was co-regent with Belshazzar. Belshazzar was really second in command to Nabonidus, and it's now 538 BC. We've gone 68 years into the Babylonian captivity.
And soon the Jews will be returning to their homeland. As soon as Babylon is overthrown, Darius comes to the power, to the leadership, then Darius will set the captives free. It's interesting here that Belshazzar reminds me of a teenage son who throws a wild party when the folks are out of town.
Exactly. The history, I understand, is that Nabonidus was a military man and was out on the road of conquest at the time this scene took place. Belshazzar wasn't the least bit worried about security in the kingdom, and we're going to get into how the kingdom fell in just a moment. Right now, verse 2, Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem. Now, this is a very important note, because if you can imagine a Babylonian drunken orgy, the height of insult would be to take the holy temple vessels and use them in this feast. And JR, this is more than just a drunken orgy. This is sort of the culmination of all evil in the kingdom of Babylon. It's the culminating scene of social decadence in Babylon. And so we have here, he demanded the vessels to be taken out, brought to the feast, that the king, his princes, his wives, his concubines might drink therein. And they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and brass and iron, wood, and of stone. Wow.
Yeah, let me go back and read just a little bit of what happened 68 years before, when Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem. Well, actually, I guess this was around 587 BC, because they did not destroy the temple in 606. They waited a few years. But here's what happened eventually. He brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden or old man or him that stooped for age, he gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the walls of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. So they carried everything back to Babylon, including the not just the vessels of the temple, but the treasures of the temple, and the menorah, evidently, as well.
Well, J.R., I would think so, because the menorah was a beautifully crafted work of solid gold. It would have to be a prize. In fact, if you had it today, you could say that you had perhaps the most valuable article in the world. Solid gold, it was crafted symbolically with flowers and with almonds, and it's not only symbolized God and the fruit of the Spirit, but it also symbolized creation and the light of the world. In other words, it was more than just a candlestick. It was almost a scientific statement, if you will. It was a metaphor. Mm-hmm. And we have in verse 5 now, in the same hour. Now this is fascinating, because as this is going on, in the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Wow.
Yes, it was over against the candlestick.
Yeah, which in the Hebrew, or in plain English, would be next to. Mm-hmm. So right next to the candelabra or candlestick that was against the wall.
Which may have been the menorah from the temple.
It seems certain that it was, because it has the definite article. It is called here the candlestick. It's not just a candlestick. I think if it weren't, the text would say next to a candlestick on the plaster of the wall. But it doesn't say that. It says next to the candlestick. And there's only one the candlestick. And we have a part of a man's hand that appears, and it writes on the wall. Now this is something.
I've got a question, Gary.
What's that?
Where's the rest of the arm and the body?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that Belshazzar asked that same question.
I have a feeling that attached to that hand was an arm and a body. And it must have been an angelic messenger from God to come and write the handwriting on the wall. And the only part that they saw was the part that appeared in our dimension.
Yes.
Fascinating.
It was maybe one of those watchers and holy ones that came.
Well, you know, Gary, there had to be something behind the hand. It could not be just a hand and fingers.
That's right.
But they only saw the part that wrote. But it was an angel to come down and give God's judgment, his summary judgment against Belshazzar and the whole kingdom of Babylon, for that matter.
You know, when it comes to evil, people commit sin. And as long as they're not caught, they think everything's all right. It's like the little boy getting caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He's trying to come up with a million excuses. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happened to Belshazzar. Then the king's countenance was changed, his thoughts troubled him, so the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. He was terrified. Why? Because he knew he had been caught doing evil. In other words, he was not ignorantly using those temple vessels. He was deliberately defiling those vessels. And now he sees that hand, and he says, oh no, God has caught me.
Now the interesting thing is, Gary, there is an unseen presence with every person on this planet, me and you. And this unseen presence is watching what you do, and he knows what you think. He knows the intentions of your heart. You think you're getting away with something in the darkness of being alone? No, there's somebody with you every moment. And what you do, what you think, is recorded. Just want you to know that.
Now, Nabonidus is king. He's away on a campaign. Belshazzar is second in command. And Belshazzar cried aloud to the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. And the king spake, said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Well, here comes Daniel again.
Yes. Daniel shows up just in time, and he's getting up in years too.
Yes, he is.
Just in time to give him the prophetic significance of this. And by the way, there is a prophecy connected with the handwriting on the wall. It's not just a proverbial handwriting on the wall that spelled the end of that particular kingdom. It looks forward into the far future to the kingdom of the Antichrist and the final world government's fall. We'll tell you about it when we return in just a moment. The handwriting on the wall tells Belshazzar his time is up, that the kingdom of Babylon is about to be destroyed. And he was home making a party when he should have been watching the walls of the city. The city of Babylon was actually a well-fortified city, Gary. How were these Persians and the Medes able to conquer?
Well, that's fascinating because the city itself was made of literally billions of baked bricks. And the walls were 60, 70, 80 feet high and wide enough to ride chariots abreast. Now, we're talking about something that you can't break down, you cannot climb over. But interestingly, the city itself had to have a water supply. And they had diverted a stream right through the city of Babylon that flowed under one wall, the north wall of the city, and out the south wall of the city. So there was a stream running right down through the middle of this walled city, under the walls. And as we look at the historical overthrow of the city, we discover that the Medes simply dammed up that water supply. It dried up and it left a beautiful aperture right under the wall. And they rode in through the riverbed in the middle of the night, and presto, they were in the city.
Wow. So while Belshazzar was having this big party, the enemy was coming under the wall.
Yes, quietly. Because you know, when you come through a riverbed in the mud, you can bring a lot of horses and equipment, men, right down through that riverbed, and you're not going to hear anything. And you'll be overtaken before you even know it.
Mm. And so Daniel is called for. He comes, the king offers him a third of the kingdom. Daniel says, I could care less, you know, give it to somebody else, but I will interpret for you. And Daniel was the only one who could read this, Gary. Mm-hmm. Was this written in Hebrew?
Well, actually, it seems to have been written in Aramaic, in the language of the court, but that's not the difficulty with it. The difficulty of the handwriting is that it is a metaphor. For example, you can say something in English like valley, valley, tree, apple. Well, what does that mean? You know, bring someone who can interpret that. I ride through two valleys and see a tree that has an apple on it. Oh, well, that's what it means. Okay. And this is kind of the way this thing is written. Mene, tekel, upharsin. This is what was written on the wall. And Daniel was called in to interpret it. Now, I'm going to begin by reading from the historian Flavius Josephus. This is what he said Daniel's interpretation was. Mene, that if it be expounded in the Greek language, may signify a number, because God has numbered so long a time for thy life and for thy government, and that there remains but a small portion. Tekel, that this signifies a weight, and means that God hath weighed thy kingdom in the balance, and finds it going down already. So tekel, which by the way is the same word as shekel in the Hebrew. And so shekel means a weight. Phares, says Josephus, this also in the Greek tongue denotes a fragment. God will therefore break thy kingdom in pieces and divide it among the Medes and Persians. So that's what Josephus thought that Daniel had rendered the statement. Now,
That's fascinating.
it is fascinating in the Greek and in the Hebrew.
So they
Now,
were all numbers.
they were all numbers, absolutely. So we have a weight and a weight and a half a weight. So we have divisions. If you read this in the Hebrew, it can be interpreted a mina, that is a larger weight, a mina, a larger weight, a shekel, which is a smaller weight, and a half mina. So it can be thought of as an expression of weights and balances. A mina, a shekel, and a half mina, if you want to read it as weights.
I see.
Or you can read it as numbers. A mina being a large number, a mina a large number, a shekel a smaller number, and a half mina a smaller number.
Now, I've been told that the mina is 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
2 minas here, mina, that'd be 2,000. And a tekel, or a shekel as it would be said in Hebrew,
Yes.
would be 20. And half the euphorcine, or the perez, as
Right.
it's referred to here, is a half of a mina. Now, we're talking about 2,520 in this handwriting on the wall.
Absolutely. Now, this 2,520, JR, is a number that we see over and over and over again as a prophetic number.
So here is the riddle of it, the riddle that the king's court could not comprehend, and it took Daniel to interpret it.
And Daniel, according to Scripture, says in verse 26, this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. That was some night. It started out with a banquet,
Yeah.
with an orgy, handwriting on the wall, and all of the times this is happening, the Medes are creeping in under the wall in the riverbed. Daniel is called. He gives an interpretation. And this is the strange thing to me, JR, because he says to Belshazzar, your kingdom is at an end. Belshazzar rewards him by
Yes.
making him third in the kingdom.
A lot of good that did.
Yeah, a lot of good.
And the 62-year-old Darius the Mede took the kingdom. Now, Gary, let's talk about the 2,520 and the prophetic implications of what that may refer to. First of all, according to the prophetic year, and I'm not making this up, it's 360 days. Okay, same as the degrees in a circle.
Right.
And we know that there are 365 and the 4 days in a year, but from the pages of the Bible, 360 was called a prophetic year, or at least surmised to be that by the theologians. And so what we have here is 2,520, and if that refers to days, then that would be 7 years, wouldn't it?
7 times 360, 2,520, which is the many tekel upharsin, which then is a time clock, if you will, that starts in a particular place and ends in a particular place.
Yes, we got 7 years there. We think of the 7-year tribulation period. But Gary, let's think of an alternative here. Could this number refer to years, the years of the Gentile rule, the times of the Gentiles? Could we be talking about 2,520 years?
Indeed, and if you look back, JR, for example, 2,520 years from our own time takes us back to the time of the proclamation of Haggai and Zechariah and the building of the temple, because That was written in 520 BC. So all you have to do is go forward 2,520 years from that, and you'll be at the general time of the rebuilding of the temple. That's our day. So it all depends on where you place this interval. We don't exactly know where to start it and where to end it, but we know we're in the general time.
We're in the general time of the conclusion of the end of the times of the Gentiles. And some have suggested that 1967 concluded the times of the Gentiles, when Israel took East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount back. Right. We cannot say with any degree of accuracy whether that be the case. But we do feel that when Jesus comes and establishes his kingdom and rules as King of Kings and Lord of Lords from Jerusalem, the times of the Gentiles will be over and the kingdom of heaven will be established. Wow. We'll be back in just a moment.